Alright, moving on to the next part of this router table build. I'm getting ready to put a coat of paint on it here. Actually, a couple coats on it. And my original plan was to take it outside and give it a quick spray with that HVLP setup that I've got. Turned out that this is 31 inches wide. The door is a 32-inch door, and this won't fit through it without removing the stop. So here I am with a brush, just applying a couple coats with a brush. And I'm basically just going to start with the bottom of it here and put 2 coats on that, and then put the casters back on and flip it back over. And I tried some of this high gloss interior exterior paint from Lowe's. It's a Sherwood-Williams that they're selling now, and actually I'm real happy the way it covers and goes on for being bare wood. You put the first coat on, do a little bit of sanding, and put the second coat on, and it covers really beautiful. And it's time to drill a big hole here for the dust collection hose, that top vacuum chamber. And it turns out that little atomic drill I got from Home Depot doesn't quite want to turn a 4 1/4 inch hole saw. It just doesn't have enough power there. So I started messing with that for a while and didn't really get too far. So finally I got out the big old 18 volt one, and that one wasn't much better because the gearing in the head there is actually going. Even when you have it on the drill position, it kind of gets to a point where too much torque and everything slips. So it did take me a while, but eventually I got the hole in there like I needed. And there it is. That just kind of drops down. Then I've got this area here. I needed to put a rabbet around the whole inside so I could drop a piece of plastic on top of it to seal it, because the bottom of the router table's got all kinds of different casting ribs and this and that, so it was kind of impossible to seal this area the way I wanted to. So I'm just taking this plywood framework that I built to set everything on, and then I'm going to cut a piece of plexiglass here to fit it right in there. And you can see I've got some other slots and stuff cut for stepping motor wires to go through to the back and stuff like that. So that's all going to be put in there in place and siliconed in place once it's painted. And I put a couple coats of paint in that area to start out with, and then there's everything siliconed in the wire going to the back there for the power supplies and stuff. So pretty much a sealed chamber except for those holes for the dust to come through. So once I got that all done, I was able to start mounting the electrical components in the back there. You can see I've got that big 36 volt power supply there, and that's got a big fan on it that actually cools the motor drives. And I've got some electronics in the front there for turning the machine on and off, and then the big contactor in there to start the router. And then I need a power cord, and a couple years ago I bought some of these 12-3 50-foot extension cords from Costco for like $24 for 2 of them. So I'm just cutting a piece off the end of that for my power cord, because it's, you can't buy a piece of wire and plug to put on it for that kind of money. So everything's powered up and working on the AC side now, and you can see the router kicks in that 30 amp contactor. Hopefully that'll help make the switch last longer on the router by not just using a regular wall switch on it to start it up. And then it's time to put the dust hose into the cabinet, and I just dropped it down through that hole that I drilled a little while ago, and I'm just putting a couple of screws spaced around the inside there to hold it. And then everything is sealed up with a coat of silicone around all the mating surfaces there. So that's pretty much sealed. Then it's time to cut down that piece of plexiglass to fit the opening there, and this stuff was really nasty to cut on the saw, so I took my other 60 tooth Amana blade and I put it on the saw so that the teeth are facing backwards, and I'm just gonna cut it like this using that. You have to push a little bit, but if you try to use it with the teeth cutting in the right direction, this plexiglass will actually shatter and turn into a million pieces on you. So just have to take your time and cut everything out so it fits. And there it is. It drops right into that rabbet that I routed around there. So now I have a nice sealed chamber. that's going to pull the air from around the top of the router. I don't like those enclosures that everybody else uses because they actually pull a vacuum on the router, which actually hurts the router when it comes to cooling. So I feel this is a much better way to go, is to pull the heat off the top of it like this and get it out of the way, and actually help the cooling in the router with the vacuum. So then I'm just going to put a bead of silicone and just drop that right down in the silicone, and that's pretty much a chamber all sealed up there now. So now it's time to mate the top and the table together there, and I've got that nifty lift hanging from the ceiling. I put a nice stout hook up in the ceiling there to hold it, because this top actually is going for over 150 pounds now, I think, with all the rails and slides on it and just the weight of the top and stuff. So this nifty lift is an easy way for me to be able to pick up and move heavy things in my shop without too much of a struggle and without straining. So I got that hanging up in the air off the beams, and then it was just a matter of being able to roll the base unit cabinet underneath it and set that in place, and everything's got to be positioned pretty much perfectly here for the all the linear scales and stuff to work the way I'm putting it together. But it all just fit together nice. So I got the cabinet under there, and then you can see that lift really does make it easy to position things like this and move things like this around by yourself. Yeah, I was really surprised how easy that little rope lift actually made it to handle this tabletop. So I got everything pretty much together, just a little bit of final alignment to get everything cleared and in the right place. And you can see I could just pull that 150-pound top up no problem to move things around, and finally it's set down in place. And it just took that little nifty lift and 4 of those heavy-duty cargo straps, and there you can see I put a good heavy beam across between the rafters there, or joists there, to hook it to. So now that I got everything together, it's time to start doing the final wiring of it. I had everything, I just left things longer so I could trim them down later, and had everything all buzzed out and marked to where it's going to go. So this is when you realize just how big and fat your fingers are when you're trying to get these little wires in the terminals and stuff, especially when you're dealing with like 24 gauge wire here. But luckily the terminals had nice little clips on them to hold the wires in place, so I didn't need terminals or anything. So, that made it easy. And then when I got all wired up, hooked up, ready to run, I ran into a problem. I had to pull that whole top control panel section apart because I had one wire that wasn't in the one of the pulse generators right, and it was giving me a real hard time. So I got that fixed up, and everything's ready to run up there. You can see some of the wires for the limit switches and stuff are still there they are, still kind of hanging out. They have to be finalized yet, and then the stepper motors up front needed longer wires, so I didn't have any of the right colored wires, so I just took what I had, and I found that I've got these pieces of colored tape that I just put on the other end, so I know what the color of the wire really should be, and it doesn't really matter what color the wire is when it's buried through the frame. Then I had that the digital scales there, and the instructions said, it didn't tell you how to do it, but it said you could cut these at any point and shorten them. So I figured, what the heck, I'll just take a hacksaw to it and see what happens. And luckily I cut it to what I needed, and no damage, no nothing. It's just kind of like almost looks like a epoxy glass scale or something like that. So there, that's all cut down. And in the meantime, the mail lady came with my slides from Amazon. I went to Home Depot, and they wanted like $15 a set for 12-inch slides like this with a 100-pound rating and a 1-inch over travel. And I needed 6 of them, and I went on Amazon, and I found a pack of 10 pairs, actually, for I think it was $42 that I paid for them. So a little over 40 cents or $4 a pair, with the screws included, so I couldn't complain about that, and I figured I'd give them a try. And then I have some little extenders for the fence there to actually support longer materials, and I needed to put some radiuses on them, so I just have these little plywood panels that I've made up in the past with different radiuses on them for when you want a nice, smooth, even-looking radius on something. You just take the router with a guide bit and run it around, and you can, do a perfect radius in a couple of seconds with no sanding or no problems. So that, I got them all ready to go. And then I had to make a little bracket for the DRO to adapt that to the fence. And that just goes on the scale like that using the 4 mounting holes. And then it actually mounts to the bottom of the fence once everything's installed. So I decided to just to screw that scale onto the side of the cabinet there. I got everything pretty much perfect in line and mounted down, and so I'm just gonna leave it hang out there in case I ever have a problem or have to replace it. It'll be really easy out there. And it shouldn't get in the way because it's on the output side there. And then I had to make some decals for it. Everything looks better with decals on it, so I went up and got the Cameo 3 out, drew up some artwork, and started cutting a big artwork panel for the side there. And then you have to go back and do what they call weeding, and that's just pulling away the excess of vinyl that's not required. That takes a while to get it all cleaned out, but it's fun having that machine. I need some brackets for the optical sensors on the ends of the limits. And I was going to 3D print them, but I decided to try to machine them out of some plexiglass that I had, some thick blocks. And that was kind of a mistake because I started out making 5 of them, and I wound up with 2 good ones by the end because it was so brittle and it just had stress cracks in it, stuff like that. But at least I got the 2 that I needed right now, and it's time to just screw these little optical sensors on. And they had like a lead sticking out the back of the board, so you really had to hollow everything out behind them and stuff too. And again, here's some little tiny screws with trying to get them on with big fingers isn't always so easy. So there you can see how they just clip right onto the rail there, and they're adjustable along the entire length of the rail. And then there's just a small screw that goes up in the bottom and actually pinches them on the rail to lock them in position wherever I need them. And then it's kind of time to try them out and make sure everything works the way it should. And you can see the table goes forward, and then it comes to a stop once it hits the optical switch, and the motors actually lock up, and it'll only go backwards from there. So, won't be able to exceed any of the limits or anything. And they actually work really good. I was surprised. They're extremely accurate. I couldn't believe it. So, that part's pretty much all worked out. There's the front one, and then I went back and got the back one all mounted and wired up, and that one actually works the same. And here you can see a little better how that bracket that I made comes between them. And it stops, and it's usually within like half a thousandth of an inch when you look at it on an indicator. And then I stuck my sticker on the side there and gave it a name, and everything's all pretty much all ready with the fence ends of it to run. And there you can kind of see those little red lights blinking on and off. The limits are actually hooked into those little relays there, and that's what controls the end limits and shuts it down and backs it up. And here's these little work supports all done and ready to go in. And the worst part of them was peeling that paper off the old plexiglass, or the old, that's Lexan actually. And it was stuck on pretty good because it was probably 25 years old. But they just slide into the bottom of that woodpecker fence that I made, and there's a 20,000 spacer to get them down flush with the table, and then some set screws to actually level everything out perfectly in the end. There you can see that lets me route the edge of like an 8-foot board with nothing, no problem, nothing hanging off the end or anything. So, and then here's the one that goes on the other side with the cutout for the actual dust fitting. So they kind of protect sawdust from getting down in there, and they actually will offer a lot of support for the anything that's overhanging when you're routing it. And next it's time to get the fitting in. And I got one of these Dust Right ports from Rockler, and basically it's just a molded elbow that's two pieces glued together. It's like two halves, and I had an old 4-inch blast gate that I'm putting on the side there, and this is going to allow me to balance the flow between the top and the that bottom chamber from a 4-inch hose. So basically I just took that old blast gate and drilled 4 holes in it for mounting it, and just slipped it through the hole I drilled in the side of the cabinet there with the 4-inch internal dust hose on it, and then got everything lined up and drilled a couple pilot holes and added some screws to hold it in place. Yeah, I originally had some different ideas of how I was going to handle the dust hose when I started out, but this turned out it looked like the best solution for what I'm trying to do here. So I got that screwed onto the side there, and then that T that I bought actually just goes right on there. And it did come with one clamp for mounting it, but it was a little bit loose, and when I tightened the clamp up, everything was fine. But then the other fitting on where it slips over the T there, that was a little bit loose, so I did go back later and add another clamp to that at the time just to pull all that tight so there'd be no leaks. And there you can see the second clamp, and there's the hose that goes up into that other chamber that's all sealed in place now. So that's all ready to go. Then I need another sheet of plywood for the drawers, and I went to Lowe's this time. I figured I'd try their plywood, and it's you can see it's a little thicker than stuff I got at Home Depot. It looks really beautiful on the outside. It's both sides of it are perfect. There's not one flaw in anywhere in the sheet on either side. But it turned out that beauty was only skin deep in that plywood. The internal core plies on it were actually a total mess once I started breaking the sheets down. So I had them cut it in half into 2 4-foot pieces in the store, so it would be easy for me to handle. And then I started to break that down into the size pieces that I needed for the drawers. And I must say it feels like it's actually a lot lighter weight than the plywood that I got at Home Depot also. I'm not sure what it's made out of, but they just said it's something like whitewood plywood. And there you can start to see some of the plies, what they look like, all the voids in them, how they're a lot of sections of them, I'll show you in a little while, are kind of like overlapped and squished. But the trouble is, once you there's a lot of tension built up in this, the way they made it, and once you start cutting it down into strips, they actually start bowing and twisting a little bit. And there you can see some of how they've got the plies overlaid and twisted and squeezed. And well, when you cut those pieces, you can see they're pretty much all bowed a little bit one way or the other now. And I wasn't real happy with that, so I had to figure out a way to make everything come out nice and square and flat in the end. So whenever I cut anything here, I'm cutting them to length and stuff. I clamped them right down to this sled. One thing I did find out about this sled is that I should have left that fence about 1/8 inch up from the board, because that round edge on there really does catch the sawdust, and it's a pain to get it out of there once it gets pushed in there. So I'm going to have to, reset that whole thing someday. But I did use this sled for cutting everything, and, it did give me 100% accurate cuts, no problems, and, there really wasn't much room for error the way I was going now. So I, pretty much, you can see I made sure everything was clamped down because of the warpage and stuff like that, and, everything, that way all the cuts wound up being nice and square and flat. And there you get an idea of the junk that's inside that plywood there. It's like, really, really wasn't that nice. And then a mail lady came in the meantime with my piece of dust hose there for going for the top to the bottom there. And I ordered a real flexible one, and it almost looks like a dryer hose. It's nothing real fancy. It's really, really soft and flexible, and Doesn't look that heavy duty, but when you go to cut it, it's amazing just how tough that plastic that they used, and it really is. It's it looks like it'll last. It's not real smooth on the inside, so I'm not sure if that'll affect the flow or not. But it's really a super flexible hose if that's what you're looking for. And then there's that one slinky wire in there that I had to cut with a pair of heavy duty tin snips there just to get that cut off. So I was able to get that all, it screwed onto that top fitting I had glued in place in the fence, and then it just went down and clamped onto the fitting down near that T. And now I'm setting up the dado jig to cut the dados in the end of these pieces, and you can see that that's why I put that slider on the left hand side of the blade, so I would have zero clearance without having to cut into it. And then here you can see I've got my little pusher blocks to hold everything down perfectly flat, because if you don't, nothing's going to go together right here. But I wound up going with a thicker material for the drawer bottoms, just so I could square it up and glue it together. And here you can see I had some, actually on the deeper drawers I'm using 3/4 inch plywood. On the shorter ones I'm using 1/2 inch plywood. So what I've decided to do was to get everything to pull in nice and square. I was going to take the plywood, and I'm cutting rabbets that are the exact dimension of everything to square it up and pull everything straight when you glue it up. And this is a little bit of an extra step, but it should make everything come out so that you can't tell how bad the wood was when you started. And I have to tell you that those the little pusher blocks really grip on good, and they're really good for flattening things out when you want to make sure you get a good flat cut. So there's the 3/4 inch one. You can see how that drops right into the rabbet, and then it locks in there, and that'll actually pull everything nice and straight when you clamp it down. And then the side everything just kind of slides together there and locks in place. Like, it's kind of the same technique that I use for all the drawers that I make. I just use a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch slots on everything. So there it is. The first one's kind of all set together, and I put one in the cabinet there just to check the dimensions against the slide and stuff, and then I just went back and finished all the cuts. And this was a 1/2 inch plywood for the other ones. And actually, this was a little bit worse warp, so I had to really push that down. You can see to get the cuts made. But everything in the end really did come out nice, so I can't complain. And these little push blocks from Rockler, the Bulldog ones or whatever they are, they work really good. So now I did go through and do the test assembly on all of them, just to make sure that all the cuts were good and stuff, and everything fit together right. Came out with the right dimensions when you were done. And I will say that Incra miter sled really did make everything come out perfect in the end. Everything's perfectly square, and no problems there. And there's where the 4 drawers stack up in the back. Now I'm getting ready to start the glue up. So you can see I got one of the little baby glue bottles too, and actually I got a new glue brush here, because the old one here that I had, that's probably about 15 years old, the bristles are starting to fall out of it. So here's one of the first drawer glued up, and actually the next video I'll go into the glue up procedure and whatnot. I'm going to end this here, and there you can see I've got all the parts ready to get going on building the router lift next, once I get the drawers all finished up and in place. And pretty much I have all the electronics for the lift done, and the motors mounted and everything else, so that should be an easy job. And there you see DROs in place for it and everything else, so that shouldn't take too long. So whenever I get a chance to go down and spend some time working on it, I do. And got the wires for the limits on the other one, and I still have like a piece of tabletop to make for the back there, and get all the drawers finished up. And there's a stepper motor for the lift, and vacuums all in place, and pretty much a couple more of these videos and it'll be done. And then there's some bit storage going to be in the front there when it's all done. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.